Okay, so good evening. Applying mindfulness in a practical way, I think would have it would that would require us to extend applying mindfulness when we are in this meditation posture. That would require us to extend beyond that, not only when we are in session, not only when we are in front of the altar, cross-legged and all proper like this, we would have to extend even beyond that. Otherwise, it wouldn't be practical, right? So therefore, then the Buddha, when he taught and gave these teachings on how to practice mindfulness, then he talked of, I think, like the 4 behaviors. I could use this term, the 4 behaviors, or like the 4 postures. So this would be sitting, and then standing, and walking, and lying down. So in all these sort of aspects, in all these situations, then it is proper, it is allowed to practice mindfulness, So we shouldn't only think when we say mindfulness, practice mindfulness, it should only be done in front of the altar in the correct position or in the required position like this. We don't have to necessarily think like that. So by taking the 5 precepts, by turning away from the 3 faulty, I could say, I think the 3 faulty physical actions and the 4 faulty verbal actions, by turning away from these 7 faulty actions, we are in a way practicing mindfulness. And we are applying mindfulness in the sphere of, in the physical and the verbal sphere. So this acts as the foundation, as the basis for practicing mindfulness in meditation. So if one wants to practice mindfulness, then you can begin, since you have already taken some precepts, then this is where one can train, in mindfulness, in being mindful. So this, I think, is a practical way of applying mindfulness, so that it affects those around us in a positive way. At the very least, it causes, at least it won't cause our physical and verbal actions if they are accompanied by mindfulness. If we are mindful of our actions, our physical and verbal actions, at the very least, we will not harm others, right? So this is how one should apply mindfulness in the context of relating with others and refraining from harming others, and if possible, then in helping others, in assisting others. And we do this, of course, by being mindful of our actions and the impact, what the repercussions of our actions. So we do this by being mindful of those facts, of those aspects. Not sort of mindlessly engaging in actions, but actually being aware of the repercussions, being aware of what will happen, what might happen if we approach the person in this way, or if we use some words or talk to them in another way or like this. Then by applying mindfulness, then this helps us I think, to practice better, to practice better, and in also honoring our pledges, in honoring our precepts, so like this. And also, with this other aspect of mindfulness, which is being focused on the present moment, this can also be helpful in, I think, refining our actions. Because if you think about it, why our physical actions and verbal actions are not so refined, when they are not refined, it is due to, I think, as we say, afflictive emotions. These afflictive emotions, they arise because we are holding on to the past or we are anticipating the future. They are related to those two aspects, mostly, right? So by being focused on the present, then this is effective in stopping these afflictive emotions from arising. Therefore, then these afflictive emotions will not motivate negative actions, right? So this aspect, both of these two aspects of mindfulness, then they have both this, I think, common benefit of helping one from avoiding these negative actions, avoiding committing those negative actions. We have to regulate our body, speech, and mind. This is important. Even though these thoughts and actions they arise spontaneously, nevertheless, we should regulate them, and not just let them flow by themselves. We should sort of control, regulate our actions, and mindfulness helps in regulating that, right? So with regulation, then we can bring balance in our body, speech, and mind. We can bring balance. So if you think like this, then the benefits of practicing mindfulness, not only do you get like health-related benefits, but also one's well-being. This is very important. So this is very effective in that way. So we have to contemplate why practice mindfulness. Why? So think of the benefits of mindfulness in all these ways that it benefits us. Think of all the ways in we can be benefited by just being mindful, And it doesn't require us to go to the market and then buy something. It doesn't have a price tag, Mindfulness does not have a price tag. You have it within you. All it takes is a little bit of effort from your side to invoke mindfulness. Try to put in a little effort so that you will be more mindful the next time you're doing the dishes, or you are driving or walking down the pavement, like this. So I think this is how we should practice mindfulness. And in the Buddha's teachings on mindfulness, when the Buddha taught the 4 foundations of mindfulness, so that is mindfulness in relation to the body, being mindful of the body, being mindful of sensations, of mind, and of phenomena. The reason why the Buddha talked about the four aspects in these four is that these four ways of being mindful, it then relates to the Four Noble Truths. It relates to the Four Noble Truths. So again, we have to think that ultimately we have to use this practice of being mindful in relation to the Four Truths. The Buddha's Buddha's foundational teaching, his essential teaching, is again the Four Truths. So we always have to tie the practice of mindfulness to that. If one is not able to tie mindfulness to the Four Truths, then I think even though there might be many benefits, one may reap the benefits of practicing mindfulness, but something is lacking. Something is lacking. It's not complete. It will not be complete without tying mindfulness practice to the Four Noble Truths. So again, just to reiterate, we always have to think about the Four Noble Truths, being mindful of the Four Truths. Without thinking, without contemplating the Four Noble Truths, then there is no way that we can renounce samsara. There is no way we can overcome the cyclic wheel of existence. So we have to begin with contemplating what suffering is. What is suffering? So we always have to ask this question. For most of us, we relate suffering purely, I think, on a sensation level. This is not a complete understanding of suffering. This does not encapsulate the meaning of what the Buddha said, that one should know suffering. It does not encapsulate the meaning of suffering. So therefore, we always have to think about impermanence, beginning with impermanence. And then I think we get closer to suffering the moment we think, the moment we contemplate impermanence, impermanence. There is a quote. This is from the Heart of the Middle Way. Securely tie the wayward elephant of the mind to the firm pillar of the visualization with the rope of memory. Break it in with the hooks of wisdom. Securely tie the wayward elephant of the mind to the firm pillar of the visualization, which is the image, the mental image, the meditation device, with the rope of memory. This is mindfulness. Break it in with the hooks of wisdom. So our mind is like the elephant, and this mind should be tied to the pillar of the visualization with the rope of using mindfulness like a rope, and then we have to break the elephant in with the hooks of wisdom. So if you think about it, the cause of suffering, the cause of our suffering, the cause of our present existence, ultimately is ignorance, right? Avidya, ignorance, the three mental poisons. So how do we overcome that? We have to overcome that by utilizing wisdom. And for wisdom to overcome not overcome those afflictive emotions temporarily, but from the very roots, then one must utilize mindfulness, because it is only with mindfulness, by practicing mindfulness, that one would be able to gain shamatha, concentration, single-pointedness. So in that context, then mindfulness is very important. It is said that the practice of shamatha is mainly a practice of mindfulness, So I think even if we make an effort to practice mindfulness in a way that is applicable to us who are beginners, then this also, I think, helps down the road. It helps in developing wisdom, in developing shamatha and vipassana. So if you think from that standpoint, then again, this has, practicing mindfulness certainly has its benefits. Yesterday, I think we were talking about laxity. Laxity, or this other word, dullness, dullness. I think how this is the term that was used. So dullness, there is coarse dullness, and then subtle dullness. Coarse dullness is when you recall the meditation device, the image. The image may be steady but not clear. So this is coarse laxity, dullness. And then when you recall the device, the visualization, the image may be stable and also clear, but somehow the mind is slack, The clarity is not intense, right? This is explained to be subtle dullness, subtle laxity. So, Jeremji mentions in the great treatise of the stages of the path to enlightenment that in other classic Indian classics, in the other Indian classical treatises, it does not explain this dullness, except just sort of vaguely it is mentioned in the meditation stages by Kamalashila. This is the middling stages of meditation. It mentions something like this, that if the practitioner, the meditator, is seeing the image like a person would see in the darkness, or how a blind person might see, or how one might see if one is closing with closed eyes. If this is how you perceive the image, then this is sort of falling into dullness. It is explained like this, right? So in Kamalashila's middling stages, then Jeremji says that this is the only text that explains dullness. In the other Indian treatises, they do not explain what dullness is. But then, with the English word, it is quite self-explanatory. Dullness, right? You get the point, right? But then, with the Tibetan word, then it's quite complicated, because the Tibetan word we use is something that, if you are not so familiar with Tibetan grammar and poetry, it sounds like a very technical term that most people wouldn't understand, right? So, but when you translate that into English, then it sounds very simple, dullness, and that would, dullness would, there needs to be no further elaboration on what that is, right? Dullness, it's all in the name. So, I don't know is that the same case? Is that the same case in Mandarin? Oh, okay. Okay, then also no need to explain what dullness is in Mandarin either. Yeah. But anyhow, the differentiation between the coarse and the subtle dullness is something that I think we can take a note of, a mental note of, a mental note. Yeah. So simply, even practicing mindfulness for not sort of long-term, without any long-term purpose, is beneficial, but the benefits are limited by the motivation, by the scope of one's motivation. Then obviously the benefits are limited. So depending on the motivation of practicing mindfulness, then the benefits will correspond to that, to the motivation. And if we practice mindfulness for the purpose of overcoming our present existence, which has the nature of suffering, because we have to sort of accept that no matter how good things are, how prosperous things are currently for us, there's always the possibility that we would lose that. There's always that possibility. So no matter how much we achieve in this life, in worldly ways, we are limited, We are limited that we cannot come to a point where we can say, I now have this confidence that I cannot lose anything, We cannot say that, right? We cannot say that. So, and even if we have so many things, even if we are considered very successful by other people, yet if you think about it, are we really fully satisfied with everything in life? If you think all of a sudden, one might think, oh, I'm very satisfied, I feel really good, right? But this is really momentarily. This is just a moment, right? You might be thinking, you might be feeling satisfied momentarily. That doesn't mean that if you feel very happy and satisfied today, you would also feel like that the next day. There's no guarantee. And if you're feeling very happy this week, there's no guarantee that you would feel likewise the next week. So we have to recognize that things can change, and also that things will change, things will change. The Sanskrit word dukkha, which means suffering, suffering. And samsara, the wheel of existence, the cyclic existence, samsara. The Tibetan word is korva. It means like a cycle, right? So it happened that, at the end of our studies, then we have to sort of answer in front of the assembly. We call this geshe tamja, So this is like the final test. So one person was doing this, this was his geshe tamja, and monks, then, some of the monks have to get up and then, start debating, start questioning. So one monk got up and he asked this geshe, how do you define samsara? How do you define samsara? What is the definition of samsara? The geshe was a little hesitant, And the definition, he couldn't remember the exact definition, so he was hesitating, right? And this monk who was questioning, he wasn't a serious student. So he didn't know the definition of samsara either, right? He didn't know the definition of samsara either. And this monk had this he was known for being a little mischievous, little jovial, so he was like a jovial fellow. But he was a little witty, so since both of them couldn't recall the exact technical definition, then this happy-go-lucky monk, he then said to the geshe, well, how about when things are not going your way? Isn't that samsara? So then the geshe thought about it, and he had to agree. He said, that's correct. So that's what samsara is. When things are not going your way, that is samsara, So this, I think, even, wisdom comes from such people, right? So this is definitely wisdom, that when we are not fully satisfied, in samsara you cannot find full satisfaction. You cannot, right? And then I think this was in ancient India. There was this tradition that monks from the monastery would take turns, teaching the Dharma. So one day it was the turn of this monk. Again, I don't think he was a very serious monk. So it was his turn, and then there was one person who came to him and then asked him a question, So he asked with much faith, he did the prostrations, and with much faith, he asked this monk, what is the cause of suffering? What is the cause of suffering? Then the monk said, don't know, I don't know. And then immediately the person understood, not knowing is the cause of suffering. So like this, if we approach the Dharma in the right way, even if we can learn a lot, we can really get wisdom if we have a good motivation, if we have a good motivation, then we can understand the meaning. And then you would, of course, know the story of, the great Shantideva's story, where when he was asked to give teachings, and then he gave the teaching, his Bodhisattva Chayavatara, like this, then there are many inspiring stories like that. So I think stories are very important in that way, because there is a message in those stories, right? There is a moral in that. So we have to learn those, and we have to understand the message. So I think like this. I think I don't have anything more to add, so maybe we can proceed with the questions now.
Fastest hand first. Okay, sorry, you.
Hi, Rinpoche. In yesterday's teaching, you have mentioned that in recent times, there has been the strong proliferation around this concept of mindfulness, especially in the West. And of course, nowadays, meditation courses are now very popular. Even the big multinational corporations are using that as a way to help their employees. But my concern is that these courses, they don't seem to have a valid Buddhist sort of lineage. So can we, as Buddhist practitioners, participate in those kind of programs? without destroying our kind of refuge. Yeah, thank you, Jay.
I think the short answer is of course. Of course, one can, even if one is a Buddhist, one can definitely participate in this kind of workshops, given at a company, right? I think it is when, of course, by participating in this participating in this workshop, you would only participate if you are part of that company, right? So, of course, even if you are a Buddhist, I think there is no problem. Now, we have to understand that no matter how secular those workshops may be, if you look at the origin, for example, I think mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, that itself is secular, right? But the person who started that, John Kabat-Zinn, something like that, he obviously has a Buddhist background. So he learned of these techniques from Buddhist masters, And I'm sure he has received teachings of, Mas Sadapadana Sutra and other Buddhist teachings on mindfulness. So even though those workshops are always in a secular setting, yet there is a connection to Buddha's teachings, there is a connection to the Buddha himself. So by participating in those kind of workshops, even though secular they may be, you are not in any ways going against one's refuge vows, pledges, etc. like that. There's absolutely nothing wrong in participating in those kind of workshops. Now, that's one thing. And the other thing is that even though those workshops are held in a secular setting, if the participant is a Buddhist, it's really up to the participant to make it secular for oneself or not. It's really up to you, right? It's really up to the participant. It's a bit like this story, of the monk saying, I don't know, and then the person understanding the meaning, right? So even the person who is giving the workshop, who is leading the workshop, he may be a secular person, but you, the participant, as a Buddhist, can take it and apply it in a non-secular way, can apply it towards the Dharma. So of course, I think there's absolutely nothing wrong in participating in those secular or mindfulness workshops. Yeah, thank you.
Rinpoche, thank you for your teachings. My question goes like this. In Buddhism, everyone was talking about samsara, and then become Buddha, and then Nirvana. But if we do not, or we give ourselves a name, we do not have a permanent existence, and everything is based on dependent origin. So who is going to become a Buddha? That's the first question. And then secondly, let's say how do we, in different religions, there are people talking about spirit, talking about soul, and then even in Buddha Mitra, Maitreya, they even have a school talking define how the heart of different levels of sadhanas. Then, but what actually free us is that our mind that free us. What is actually setting us free to free from samsara, rather than a different way of defining it.
Thank you. can you please ask the first question once more?
Okay. So, when we're talking in Buddhism, we are talking about samsara. And we're talking about becoming a Buddha and Nirvana. But actually, which part of us is becoming a Buddha? And then they are in different types.
This is the first question,
yes,
right?
Yes.
tumnum debo chui mitushin doyo dongi changi misela nigi toba shela pomindi chuni dembo tumbe tawar jurs. So there's this one verse which says that the Buddhas cannot wash away the negative karmas, right? They cannot wash away our negative karmas. doyo dongi changi misela. And they cannot, the Buddhas cannot take away the pain of sentient beings with his hands. And the Buddha cannot give his realizations to his disciples like this. So it is only by teaching the ultimate nature that sentient beings will become free from samsara, right? So this, I think, is how we have to become enlightened. When I say enlightened, we don't have to think of having, all this, like the 32 signs and all of like this. We don't have to think like this. Enlightenment means simply that our mind becomes free from all forms of obscurations, So this is what enlightenment is, Enlightenment isn't a distant thing, that's over there and we have to walk towards that. It's not. Our enlightenment does not exist not yet, but the moment we free our minds from those obscurations, then we are enlightened, right? Our mind becomes enlightened like this. As it is said that emptiness, ultimate nature, shunyata, is the basis for all. Because if one is ignorant of ultimate nature, then one is in samsara. If one realizes ultimate nature, then one is enlightened, right? So samsara and enlightenment, they're like two sides of the same coin, If you just have to flip. We have to flip, If we are thinking too much about, if we are being influenced by afflictive emotions, then we are in samsara. If we overcome them, then we become enlightened, right? So like this. And the second question?
And the second question will be, if this is a case, that means different religion, they have different type of definition of the nature of the mind. There are people who are talking about spirit. There are people talking about, let's say for this material Buddha, they actually have a school that defining a very subtle mind. So what actually free us from all this, and what is the difference from all this school? And are they talking about the same things like that? I changed my question a bit. Because Rinpoche, you sort of explained the first part quite very well.
So the question is, there seems to be many different sort of paths, do they all lead to the same result? Do they all lead to enlightenment? Is that
That is the path, but they are actually in different religion. Actually, they have different definition of actually so-called the more subtle mind, or they call it spirit, or they call it soul. So that's where some go to heavens and some go to hell.
right?
Yeah,
Right. So the question is, so like all these different religions, they all have their own way of presenting the path
yes,
and then the ultimate goal.
yes,
So do all of those practitioners go to the same place? This is the
yes,
question?
yes.
This is the question, right?
Yes.
I think to give an honest answer, then you would know what's going to come out. Because the paths are different, how can they have the same result? No, we have to be logical now, right? And not try to please everyone. Because there's a saying, if you try to please everyone, you will please no one, right? So I think, or maybe I can put it this way, not by relying on the path that the Buddha has shown to us, there's no way we can achieve the enlightenment that he had defined. You know, or I could just explain it like that. This might be more politically correct, you know? So this might be more politically correct. So let's stick with that version, you know? Yes. But having said that, all those paths are not practiced in vain. Of course not. They are very beneficial. If you look, you know, Christianity and Judaism and Islam, if you go to the heart of their teachings, it is clear that it's about developing a good heart. There is a very strong emphasis on ethics in all those major world religions and faiths. In all faiths there is. If there was such a religion that was so negative, then how can they have so many adherents around the world? How can that be possible? You know, how can that be possible? So, if you think like this, then even if there's no emphasis on like emptiness, but that doesn't mean that that's not good. It doesn't mean like that, right? So we have to recognize the contribution that all world or major religions make, and then appreciate them and rejoice in their positive impact that they so strongly have, you know. So just I think purely rejoicing in that is a wonderful thing, and it's something that we should all do. Remember, just because it does not accord with our beliefs or with your belief specifically, it doesn't mean that it's not good, that it's something that needs to be abandoned. We should never make this our approach, because if we do it like this, if we make this thinking if we sort of use this as our mode of approaching things, then I think there's a danger that we become somewhat fundamental in our thinking. So being fundamental, I think there are more negatives, there are more shortcomings than positivity in that approach, right? So we have to be careful and not sort of become extreme, as we were talking yesterday, like faith lacking wisdom, faith lacking mindfulness. If we have much faith and if we are not being mindful of what's going on, and if we become too faithful, if we become too extremely faithful, then there's a danger. There's a danger that we might become fundamental. There's a danger that we might sort of then make ourselves open to abuse, etc. like this. So we always have to be mindful, to always regulate our faith, to regulate our mind, and just being aware of awareness, just being aware of what's going on in our mind, what's happening right now. So like this, we have to again think about mindfulness and use mindfulness, not just think about mindfulness, but actually use it when it really matters. So, okay, thank you.
Hi Rinpoche, I have a question to ask. How do we meditate on the emptiness based on the mindfulness? It's mentioned that in balancing of the faith and wisdom, how can we advance the mindfulness to reach the emptiness?
Can you please repeat once more?
Okay.
Maybe can speak
okay,
a bit slower.
My question is that how do we meditate on emptiness based on the mindfulness?
Oh,
It's mentioned that we need to balance of the faith and wisdom. So can we advance the mindfulness to reach emptiness?
still, I'm okay. So I think the first part was how do we practice mindfulness in the context of meditating on emptiness? Was that the first part? Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, meditate on emptiness. Based on the concept of mindfulness, can we do that?
I think simply by being mindful of emptiness, Emptiness is an aspect of any phenomena. All the objects that we see, all the objects that we come into contact with, when we look, we say, this is a cup, that's a table, that is a camera, this is a house. This house-ness, the table-ness, the cup-ness, all of these are what we explain as conventional reality, right? So as soon as your mind says, this is a cup, your mind is sort of you're directing your mind towards the cup aspect, right? Or you can just say, you don't have to necessarily think this is a cup when you see a cup. You can say, there's a yellow color over here, right? So you can always choose. You can choose what aspect you want to magnetize or sort of to fill your mind with. It's up to you. So in regard to emptiness, when I'm looking at the cup, instead of directing my mind towards this conventional truth, I can just look at it as simply being empty, of being a cup from its own side, So in other words, I'm being mindful of that empty aspect. And I think this is one way of using mindfulness in the context of emptiness. And then the second part, please.
Actually, we mentioned that in balancing of the faith and wisdom, so
Balancing faith with wisdom.
faith and wisdom together, can we advance through with the mindfulness to emptiness, reach the emptiness?
I didn't get that part.
Okay. I mean, with the balancing of both the faith and wisdom, can we advance to the stage of I mean the stage of emptiness.
The stage of emptiness.
Um,
By balancing faith with wisdom, can we realize emptiness? Is this the question?
yeah, I think. Yeah.
What is stage of emptiness?
No, I mean stage. I mean reaching emptiness. I mean.
Oh, by combining faith with wisdom, can we realize emptiness?
Yes, correct.
Okay. I think maybe first you translate the first answer. Yeah. By combining faith with wisdom, can we realize emptiness? I think yes, of course. It is said that without faith, with just wisdom, with just sort of using knowledge. When I say wisdom, I'm being very liberal with this term, you know. Obviously, I'm not talking about the realization of emptiness here. With wisdom, it's more like a knowledge, more like an intellectual knowledge. With intellectual knowledge alone, I think it is impossible to realize emptiness. You know, without faith, I think it is impossible. It is impossible. Gyaltsab Rinpoche was told by Manjushri, of course, like in his visions, that he should do 3 things in order to realize emptiness. So one is to engage in the purifications, you know, in the purifying one's karma first, and then I think the second one was, you know, seeing the guru and the deity as one. And then the third one was, of course, contemplating thoroughly, studying thoroughly the great treatises of Nagarjuna, etc., like this, right? So with these 3 things, then if these 3 things are present, then it is possible that you can realize emptiness. And the second one, seeing the Lama inseparable from the deity, this is faith. You know, this is faith. And also having the ardency to engage in these purification rituals, I think that also requires faith. Simply having good knowledge of things does not sort of propel you to engage in those austere actions, you know, those penance, those hardships. It doesn't. The one thing that can propel you in acting out those hardships, I think, is faith. So without faith, it's very difficult. You know, it's very difficult. So definitely, one has to combine faith with wisdom in order to realize emptiness. Yes.
Yes, that's all from this gentleman. We
Okay.
have another question from a lady here on the 2nd floor.
Oh, please.
I have read from a few books about meditation, and there's one in Vedanta. The meditation is to find the connection. In Vedanta, meditation is also the way to find the connection our mind to soul, to the point that everyone and everything is the same, and that's only the. And then we will to the point that we will realize our body, our physical body, is not real, and only our soul is real. So according to the Vedanta, is that how we meditate that way, and when we die, our real body, our real soul, which means they call Atman, will move forward to the new life and continue to continue what the previous life they have practiced, and they will continue to reach to the samadhi, which is like enlightenment. And then in Buddhism also, when we do mindfulness, is also to get out of samsara. And it's also the way that to realize our body is not real, and we need to neutral our soul as well. And when the day comes, then we will let go, and we learn how to let go whatever at the present or in the past or in the future. It's about Buddhism as well. And I just wondering why, because of the same idea, but then why Buddhism will deny the Atman of the Vedanta? Because Vedanta is actually the Atman is our soul. And what we're practicing now is also to find our real soul, not to connect with our body. When things happen, we just let it go. So I just want to know why.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good question. Thank you. This is very important, but first, please. Vedanta. Oh, yes, yes. Oh, so Vedanta, in the Hindu philosophical system, you have these sort of root texts called the Vedas. So Vedanta primarily follows that. And I think what you are talking about is the Advaita Vedanta. So I think proponents of that would include, is it the Shankaracharyas and so forth like this. It's a very strong, it's one of the most well-known non-Buddhist philosophical systems in India, So very, very complex, very complex. This philosophical is wonderful, and it's so complex, and there's a whole science in that. There's a whole world built in that system, and it's all built on Atman, on the soul. It's beautiful. But so shall we first translate? Also, can I just give a summary of the question, and then you could translate that? Okay. So in the Vedanta system, you have the soul. It's called Atman. And the Atman, when we die, we leave the aggregate, the body, but the Atman continues and then takes a new body, and it goes like this. In Buddhism, there's something also similar. We replace the soul with mind, and we leave the body, and the mind goes from time to time, from moments to moment, from the previous stage to and it's endless. Just as Atman, the soul, is endless in Vedanta, so is the mind, which is endless in its continuity in Buddhism. So what's the difference? So what's the difference between these two theories? And then why does Buddhism reject this theory of soul, Atman? Why? So this is the question. You're right, there are definitely parallels. Just as in Vedanta, where it's all about freeing the soul from all the impurities, which is mainly, I think, the 5 aggregates and all the other conventional truths. Likewise, in Buddhism, it's about freeing our mind from all the impurities, afflictive emotions and so forth, and the impure 5 aggregates. So there are definitely parallels. But then why does Buddhism reject this notion of Atman, of this soul, which as explained by Vedanta? Because I have to be careful, because when we say soul, this could be defined, there could be many other philosophical systems could define soul in a different way, right? So here we are talking about, since we are only talking about Vedanta, then why the Buddhists reject this notion of the Vedanta's explanation of Atman, soul, or self, self, is purely based on why Buddhists reject that notion of Atman is because Buddhists base everything on dependent arising. This is a very important concept for Buddhists. Dependent arising is central. We even bring dependent arising when we talk of emptiness, even though they might sound a little incompatible, somewhat incompatible, but this is very important for Buddhists, the concept of pratitya samutpada, or dependent arising. And this is why we don't accept Atman, because the way the Vedantas explain Atman is that it is absolute. It is absolute. It doesn't arise from causes or conditions. It is absolute. It is absolute. Right? So therefore, simply based on the reasoning of dependent origination, we do not accept that. So hence, we have the word anatman. This is what we believe in, the no-self theory, right? No-self theory. In the Vedanta explanation, self, which, we can use the word person, I think it's better. The person is an absolute entity. The person is not reliant on his or her aggregates, the 5 aggregates. They're independent of that. In Buddhism, that's not the case. The person is reliant on his or her aggregates. There is no way that we can think of ourselves without thinking of the 5 aggregates. We always think of ourselves in the context of the 5 aggregates. Sometimes we see our body and then we think of, this is me. We have a feeling and then we are thinking of ourselves. We have some discriminations arising and then we think of ourselves, right? We have this knowledge, we are conscious of something and then we think of ourselves. So this appearance of I is reliant on the 5 aggregates. So like this is why we do not accept in this independent self. This self and the no-self theory, when we say no-self, we mean no independent self or no absolute self, like this, yeah.
Okay, and I also got a bit confused in that as well. But anyway, I just want to make clear of what I've been thinking about that. Actually, according to from what I understand is even though they say Atman is the absolute, but somehow it will be controlled by the karma as well. So the person, whatever he do, if he doesn't practice the karma, whatever he do in the past, and the karma right at the present will decide that karma in the future. So that's the Atman will say, like, either you will become an absolute, you can reach to nearly to the samadhi, but at to the level that you don't know how to control your ignorance or your ego, the next life will be go back to maybe the first step where you starting. And in Buddhism also the same, if we don't do our karma, we will be decided into what samsara. Because whatever we do, the equivalent samsara will send us to that. Either we go to heaven or we go to hell or we become the animal to learn or whatever. It's still the same. So I just don't know, in both Vedanta or Buddhism, who will be the one who decided that. But I just believe the karma will, same point is the point that the karma is the thing that will decide it for us to go to move on to the next life and continue to get enlightenment or that. So that's the reason why somehow I read some book, I just feel like it's just the same. It's just I don't know, I got caught up in the between, like, what the difference? And because all have to be affected by the karma.
Yes. So when it comes to karma, honestly, I don't think there is a huge difference between Buddhist and non-Buddhist Indian philosophical systems. When it comes to karma, if you ask any Indian philosophical systems that actually believe in a concept that has a concept of karma, and if you ask any of these scholars or practitioners, what is karma? They will all give the same answer. Karma means action. You know, what is more? What is more to add? What can you add more to that? If it's so simple, karma means action. And how many actions are there? They will all agree that there are 10 virtuous and 10 non-virtuous actions. That's fine, you know. That on the concept of karma, we do not differentiate between Buddhists and non-Buddhists. Because all of like your argument or like your reasoning so far has been coming from that point of view, and I agree with you there. There are definitely parallels, there is definitely common ground when it comes to karma. The only sort of where we differ is who is this person? What is this person that is experiencing karma, that is taking action, you know, that is tasting the fruit of those karma. When we talk about what defines the person, what is that? This is where Buddhists and non-Buddhists, they differ when you ask this question, right? Otherwise, as far as karma is concerned, then we have many similarities. I think we would have more similarities than we will agree more than disagree when it comes to how karma is formed and how we are affected by karma and what rounds do we take, you know. Like these things, these are all what we say, like common ground, you know. These are all sort of common explanation, and I think karma is very much related with our actions, so therefore also ethics very much connected. And when it comes to ethics, again, Buddhists and non-Buddhists, I think they are more similar than dissimilar when it comes to really sort of putting things into practice. If you think about it, all these different faiths in the world, all these different religions, when you see them having strong faith in whatever they believe, it could be a god, it could be the Buddha, it could be, you know, a spirit, whatever. If you analyze their physical behavior when they are experiencing faith, they all look the same to me. You know, you cannot differentiate from their expression. So when it comes to this sort of real practical things, you know, sort of this, when I think like when our faith sort of manifests on a physical and verbally, then we are really, really similar in that respect. But when it comes to like a philosophical point, then there are some differences, right? So when we are talking about Atman and Anatman, this is all more connected with philosophy, you know, the philosophical standpoint, rather than really the practical points, you know. So karma is something that's very practical. It's not meant to be a point that one sort of philosophize, but it's something that one has to engage in, you know. And so we are all united in that way, that it's all about being a good person, you know, taking virtuous action and then disengaging from non-virtuous, harmful actions. So like this, when it comes to karma, I see more common ground. I see that there is a basis for, you know, the different faiths to agree and to come to a consensus rather than, you know, disharmony or arguments, right? So I think it's like this. At least this is how I see it. So thank you. And with this, I think I will stop. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your